The last days of August always carry a kind of hush, as if the season itself is holding its breath before surrendering to autumn. You can sense it in the air first. Mornings no longer cling with heat, nights begin to cool, and even the sunlight feels thinner, stretching long and low across the city as though reluctant to leave. I've always thought of late summer as a whisper, a gentle reminder that nothing golden stays forever. That evening, I sat on my balcony barefoot, my legs tucked beneath me, a glass of chilled white wine sweating in my hand. Below, the city hummed its restless melody, car engines, a distant radio playing something cheerful, the occasional burst of laughter rising from a group walking home together. It all felt softer, slower, like the world had decided to move in half steps. The sky above glowed with a stubborn orange that melted into violet, and I found myself staring at it as though the colors could anchor me to this fleeting moment. It hadn't been a spectacular summer, not in the way people brag about on postcards or Instagram feeds. No wild adventures across continents, no sweeping romances under foreign skies. Mine had been quieter, stitched together from small fragments. The sticky sweetness of watermelon dripping down my wrist, the burn of sand beneath my feet after walking too far on the shore, the taste of ice cream at midnight with a friend when neither of us could sleep, the gentle weight of a book resting on my stomach as I dozed off in the park. Ordinary moments. Yet together they became something extraordinary. I realized with a pinch of guilt that I had almost let this summer slip away unnoticed. Work deadlines, endless emails, the constant hum of responsibility. They had tried to convince me that I was too busy to notice sunsets or say yes to late-night drives. I almost believed them. But then came small rebellions, leaving my phone on silent for a whole afternoon, driving with the windows down just to feel the wind tangle my hair, saying yes when I wanted to say no. And each rebellion added up until suddenly I was living in a summer that was mine. It's funny how memory works. We think we'll remember the big events, the trips, the milestones, the big decisions. But in truth, what stays are the fragments. The song that played while the city smelled of rain, the way laughter spilled so easily over glasses of wine, the freckles that appeared on my skin, uninvited but welcome, proof that I had spent time outside rather than hiding behind my laptop. On that balcony, I let the glass rest against my lips and closed my eyes. I could hear children's voices echoing faintly from a playground down the block, their joy sharp and untamed. Someone nearby grilled food, the smoky scent mingling with cut grass, a perfume that only late August carries. I thought about how much I had needed this summer, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself. I needed proof that I could still stop, breathe, and belong in the present without rushing toward the next thing. For a long time, I'd been running from expectations, from disappointments, from the heavy silence of empty apartments. But this summer, in its small, quiet way, had shown me something I'd almost forgotten. How good it feels to simply exist, to laugh until your stomach aches, to wake up without an alarm and find the sun already spilling across the sheets, to share a secret at midnight and know it's safe. I leaned back in my chair, bare feet against the railing, and watched the day darken into night. The city lights flickered alive one by one, like stars closer to Earth, and I thought about how easy it is to miss a season while waiting for something bigger, grander, more important. How easy it is to believe you're still waiting for life to start, and how beautiful it feels to realize you didn't miss it at all. This summer had slipped through my fingers like sand, yes, but not before leaving its warmth behind. The drive out of the city felt like a slow unraveling of everything heavy I had been carrying for weeks. At first, the streets held us in their grip. Traffic lights flashing stubborn red, buses groaning as they pulled over, pedestrians weaving between cars as if they owned the asphalt. But once we slipped past the last row of apartment buildings, the air changed. It always does. The city behind us shrank into something small, almost forgettable,
while the horizon stretched wide, golden and open, promising space to breathe. There were 4 of us crammed into the car, and even that felt right. Lena in the passenger seat, already scrolling through playlists, shouting every few minutes, "No, not this one, next," until she landed on a song that made all of us yell in recognition. Max at the wheel, pretending to be calm, but tapping the steering wheel to the beat, grinning whenever we shouted the lyrics out of tune. Behind them, I sat wedged against the door, one leg curled under me, the other stretched toward the middle seat where Hannah was half asleep, half singing between yawns. The air was thick with summer. Peaches we had bought at a roadside stall perfumed the car, mixing with the smell of sunscreen and the faint trace of lake water already clinging to someone's towel. I leaned my head against the window, hair whipping wild in the wind, and laughed when Lena turned the camera on me. "Delete that!" I groaned, covering my face with my hand. She only laughed harder. "You'll thank me in 10 years when you forget how free you looked." Fields rolled past us, endless waves of gold broken only by clusters of dark green trees. Occasionally, a farmhouse appeared like a secret in the distance, its roof glowing in the late light. The world outside felt bigger than usual, like it wanted to remind us that our problems, our deadlines, our tired hearts were so small in comparison. By the time we reached the lake, the sky had begun its slow descent into color, streaks of rose, lavender, and molten orange melting together above the still water. The lake stretched wide and calm, like a mirror laid carefully between the hills. We tumbled out of the car, laughing too loud, tripping over bags and sandals in our rush to feel sand beneath our feet. Someone shouted, "Last one in is cursed!" And in seconds, clothes were flying, skin flashing pale against the fading light as they charged into the water. I hesitated at first, my toes sinking into the cool edge, the shock of it biting at my skin. Then Lena splashed me from behind, shrieking, "No excuses!" And I had no choice but to dive in, the cold swallowing me whole. My gasp broke into laughter, bubbles spilling into the darkening water. We swam until our arms ached, until the stars began to puncture the sky one by one. Floating on my back, I let the lake cradle me, the sky unfolding above like it belonged only to us. The water muted everything, the echoes of laughter, the music still playing faintly from the shore, until it felt like I was inside a secret world. Later, wrapped in damp towels, we sat on the grass in a circle. Peaches passed from hand to hand. Juice ran sticky down our wrists, and no one cared. Max tried to start a fire with damp wood, cursing and laughing at himself, until Hannah leaned over with a lighter and saved his pride. The flame flickered to life, painting our faces in shifting gold and shadow. The night grew cooler, but the warmth stayed with us, in the closeness of shoulders touching, in the music drifting from a small speaker, in the way none of us looked at our phones for hours. Time blurred. We talked about everything and nothing. The worst teachers we ever had, songs we were embarrassed to admit we loved, dreams we weren't sure we still believed in. The kind of conversation that only happens when the air is thick with summer and the sky feels endless. At one point, Hannah stretched out on the grass and sighed, "We'll never be exactly here again." It was said lightly, almost lazily, but it stuck with me. She was right. This circle of friends, this exact night, this summer that was already slipping away, it would never return in the same way. I lay back beside her, the earth firm beneath me, the stars scattered like glitter across the black. My towel smelled faintly of smoke and water, my skin tingled from the chill, and my chest aches that strange way happiness sometimes does, when you know you're inside a memory even before it ends. And I thought, if happiness is really just a collection of moments, then this was one of mine. Ordinary, chaotic, imperfect, but pure.
The next weekend carried us farther, not just to a lake this time, but to the coast. It was a plan thrown together in a rush, the kind of idea that usually dies in group chats but somehow survived. By dawn, we were piling bags into the trunk, yawning into our coffees, pretending we weren't too tired to be reckless. The drive stretched longer, the road curling past villages where roosters still crowed and fishermen pulled nets from their boats. Every mile carried the scent of salt closer. Every gust of wind from the open window seemed to whisper, "Almost there." When the sea finally appeared, it was like the horizon had been peeled open. Blue, endless, alive. I felt the same childlike awe I always do. That shiver of recognition, like meeting an old friend who has outgrown you but still knows your name. We ran, half tripping over sandals until our feet sank into hot sand. It burned, but in a way that made us laugh. The air was heavy with salt and sunscreen, the cries of gulls sharp against the steady rhythm of waves. I threw my towel down and stood for a moment, letting it sink in. The sea stretched before me, a mirror of light and motion, pulling me toward it with the same power it always had. There's something about the ocean that strips you bare. No matter who you are, it reminds you of your smallness, your body just another grain of salt in its ancient memory. We swam until our lungs burned, until the water felt like it belonged to us. Waves lifted and dropped us, careless, like the ocean was both playful and indifferent. Salt stung my lips, tangled my hair, painted my skin in a sheen that no lotion could mimic. I let myself float, arms spread wide, the sun blazing above. In that stillness, I thought, why do summers always feel like they slip faster than the rest of life? The answer came in sensations, the taste of salty air, the warmth of sand baking against my back, the laughter echoing over water when someone dove too close. Summers don't slip because they're short. They slip because they're too alive, too concentrated, a flood of light and sound that no memory can fully hold. As the day bled into evening, we gathered on the beach, skins sticky with salt and ice cream dripped down our wrists. Someone strummed a guitar, the melody simple but enough to make passersby pause and smile. Lanterns flickered to life at a cafe behind us, their glow spilling onto the sand. I rested my chin on my knees, listening, watching the sun slide into the horizon like a coin disappearing beneath the waves. The colors stretched forever, crimson, orange, violet, are reminded that beauty is often just another way of saying goodbye. A breeze brushed over us, cooler now, carrying the scent of grilled fish and seaweed. I shivered lightly, but it wasn't only from the wind. It was the ache of knowing this summer, like all summers, would leave me soon. And still, as I sat there with damp hair clinging to my shoulders, surrounded by people I loved and by strangers who felt briefly like family, I thought, if this is how a season ends, then maybe endings aren't sad at all. Maybe they're just another shape of joy. Nights in late summer carry their own kind of magic. It isn't loud like the afternoons or reckless like the mornings. It's quieter, softer, as if the whole world has lowered its voice to let you hear yourself think. That night we sat on Lena's balcony, a cluttered little space overflowing with flower pots, mismatched chairs, and the smell of basil that refused to stop growing no matter how often she trimmed it. A bottle of wine stood between us, already half empty, glasses fogged with fingerprints. The city murmured below. Car horns far away, someone playing a saxophone on the street corner, the occasional burst of laughter from strangers passing by. But up there, in our little nest of plants and fairy lights, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the four of us. We sprawled in every direction, Max leaning back with his chair dangerously tipped against the railing, Hannah curled with her knees pulled close, Lena draped in a blanket that wasn't needed but made her look regal. I perched cross-legged, scribbling shapes into the condensation on my glass. The conversation began like it always does, light, scattered, silly. Who secretly loved the worst boy band songs of the early 2000s? Who had the strangest childhood crush? Hannah admitted hers was the animated fox from Robin Hood, which sent us into hysterics until she threw a grape at me. But slowly, as the night deepened, the tone shifted. It always does. The jokes softened into truths, the truths folded into confessions. I don't know if I even believe in forever, Lena said, staring at the string of lights above us. Everyone talks about finding the one, but maybe life isn't about one person.
Maybe it's about chapters. Chapters get messy, Max muttered, swirling his wine. Sometimes you want to tear out the page. And sometimes you go back and reread it anyway, I added quietly, surprising even myself. The words hung there, glowing as fragile as the fairy lights. For a moment, nobody spoke. The air smelled of grapes and warm stone, the city lights flickering like fireflies below, and I thought of all the balconies in the city, all the glasses raised in small circles of laughter and confession, and how invisible we all are to each other. And yet, for us, this night was the whole universe. I looked at my friends and realized how rare it is to be fully seen, to say something messy, half-formed, and not have it judged, to admit I'm scared, or I don't know who I'm supposed to be, and hear me too. That's the alchemy of nights like these. They don't solve anything, but they make the questions bearable. By the time the bottle was empty, we had drawn constellations and spilled wine, decided that if one of us ever moved abroad, the rest would follow, and sworn to remember this night exactly as it was. Of course we won't. Memory will blur the details, soften the edges, but some part of it will stay. The warmth, the laughter, the fragile truth we laid bare under a string of lights and a sky full of stars. And as I leaned my head back, watching the night deepen above me, I thought, summers aren't just made of sunlight. They're made of nights like these, when the air is soft and the company is enough to remind you that you're not alone.
It happened on one of those evenings when I had no plan at all. I had finished work later than I wanted, the kind of day that leaves your shoulders stiff and your mind tangled. The air outside was still warm, the pavement holding the memory of the sun, and I let my sandals slap lazily against it as I walked without direction. I passed stalls selling roasted corn, the sweet smell curling into the night air, and gardens where jasmine sprawled over fences, its perfume stubborn and bold. August was almost gone, but the city seemed unwilling to give it up. I wasn't looking for company. I wasn't even looking for conversation. What I wanted was a quiet corner, maybe a cup of tea, a chance to sit still. And that's why I stepped into the cafe. It was one I had passed 100 times but never entered, a tiny place with fogged windows, tucked between a laundromat and a flower shop. The kind of cafe you don't notice until you need it. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the hum of people winding down their day. The smell of cinnamon and coffee clung to the wooden tables, and the low lights painted everything in amber. I ordered a tea, carried it to a table by the window, and opened my notebook, though I had no real intention of writing. My pen hovered, but really I was just watching the street outside blur into twilight, people hurrying home as the first drops of rain began to fall. That's when I heard a voice. "Is the seat taken?" I looked up. He was standing there, book in hand, his hair still damp as if he had been caught in a sudden shower. He smiled, but not the polished, automatic kind people use when they want something. His was hesitant, uncertain, and somehow that made it more genuine. He held the book almost like a shield, and yet also like an offering. I could have said no, I almost did, but something about the way he looked at me, curious, a little nervous, but open, made me nod. "Go ahead," I said softly, and with that small choice, the evening shifted. He sat, carefully placing his cup down, then his book, as if arranging small anchors. For a while we didn't talk. He opened the book, I pretended to write, and silence settled between us. Not heavy, not awkward, but tentative. When the waitress returned with his coffee, he finally broke it. "I hope I'm not interrupting your very serious work," he said, glancing at my notebook with a crooked smile. I laughed, shaking my head. "Deeply important nonsense. So yes, but I'll forgive you." The way his shoulders relaxed made me realize he'd been holding his breath for my answer. "That's a relief," he said. "I'm usually good at annoying people without even trying.
At least now it's official. The words weren't extraordinary, but the way he said them made me laugh, really laugh. The sound surprising even me. Something inside loosened. Conversation, once it started, didn't stop. We compared favorite street foods, debated whether sunsets looked different near the sea, argued over which songs truly belonged to summer. And while the words themselves might fade one day, the feeling won't. He spoke with the rhythm of late August, unhurried, golden, tinged with the awareness that time is slipping, but still worth savoring. I found myself leaning forward without realizing it, my hand tracing absent circles on the table, as if my body wanted to close the distance between us. Then the rain came, sudden and insistent, drumming against the cafe windows. The sound wrapped the room in its own cocoon, muffling everything outside. People on the street darted for cover, umbrellas flipping uselessly, laughter and curses mingling as they scrambled. We both turned to the window at the same time, and in the glass, our reflections overlapped, faint and blurred. For a moment it startled me, not because he was close, but because it felt oddly right, like I had seen this before, in some dream or half-memory. His smile caught in the reflection, and mine answered before I could stop it. When the storm eased, we stood together, lingering near the door. The street was wet and glistening, the air rich with the smell of rain on asphalt. He held out a small umbrella, clearly not built for two, and without hesitation, we stepped beneath it, shoulders brushing. The walk was short, barely a few blocks, but the sound of rain dripping from rooftops and the warmth of being half-sheltered made it feel like something worth keeping. We talked less then, letting the silence between us breathe. But every so often, his shoulder would tilt just enough to shield me more than himself, and I noticed. I noticed everything. I don't know if it meant anything beyond that night. Maybe it was just a fleeting encounter, a stranger passing through the last days of my summer. But as I stepped into my building and turned to say goodbye, his smile lingered in my chest like an echo. And I thought, some people you forget within hours. Others, even if they only sit across from you once, become part of the season.
The morning after that cafe evening, I woke with the strange heaviness that comes when dreams blur into memory. I couldn't remember if I had dreamt of him or just replayed every detail so many times that it became stitched into the fabric of sleep. The umbrella, the sound of rain, the way his laugh had caught me off guard, it all lingered like a perfume that clings to your skin long after you've left the room. I sat with my coffee by the window, staring at the quiet street below, and thought about how fleeting moments always feel heavier than they should. Why is it that a stranger's smile can weigh more than 100 conversations with people you've known for years? Why do we let small encounters press so deeply into us while entire seasons sometimes vanish without leaving a mark? Maybe it's because the unexpected teaches us more than the planned ever could. I'd spent most of the summer trying to organize, trying to schedule happiness as if it were something I could check off a list. A weekend at the lake, a few days by the sea, even those balcony nights with friends had started as calendar invitations. But that night in the cafe, the umbrella, the laughter spilling against the sound of rain, it hadn't been planned. It had just happened. And that's what made it real. Still, part of me resisted. I didn't even know his last name, his story, whether I'd ever see him again. It could have been nothing more than a single page in a book that would never be finished. My instinct has always been to hold back, to remind myself not to mistake coincidence for destiny. Yet another part of me whispered, what if it doesn't matter? What if meaning isn't measured by duration, but by depth? I thought back to other summers, other endings. How many times had I let something beautiful slip away because I convinced myself it wasn't serious enough to matter? I remembered being 21, saying no to a road trip because I thought work was more important.
I remembered a conversation under fireworks that I walked away from too soon. Life has a way of reminding you that the things you almost ignored are the very ones that stay with you. The street outside stirred. Children chasing each other, a woman carrying groceries, a cyclist gliding past. Ordinary scenes of ordinary lives. And I realized that maybe the magic of that night wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about me, and the fact that I had allowed myself to stop running long enough to let something unexpected in. For so long, I've carried a fear of missing out on the big things, the milestones, the certainty everyone else seems to find. But sitting there with my coffee, I felt something different. Gratitude. Gratitude that I hadn't missed the small things. Gratitude that summer, which was already slipping through my fingers, had left me something worth holding. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. I don't even know if it matters. But I do know this. When I look back at the summer, I won't remember the endless work emails or the plans that fell apart. I'll remember the way the rain hit the glass, the warmth of laughter I didn't expect, and the quiet thought that maybe life doesn't ask us to hold on to everything, just enough to remind us we were alive.
The thing about summer is that it doesn't always give you grand stories. Sometimes it just hands you fragments, little flashes that don't seem important until later. And those fragments stay, stitched into memory like beads on a string. I've come to realize that the small things are what hold a season together, even more than the big events we plan so carefully. This summer, for me, was watermelon dripping down my wrists on a balcony too hot for comfort. It was standing in line at a tiny ice cream shop, debating flavors with Lena for 20 minutes, only to choose the exact same ones we always did. Vanilla for her, pistachio for me. It was music blaring from open car windows, songs that became anthems not because they were new or even good, but because we sang them until our voices cracked and they attached themselves to our laughter. I remember walking barefoot across overheated pavement, sandals dangling from my hand, the heat stinging my skin just enough to make me laugh at myself. I remember the scent of sunscreen on my arms long after the sun had gone down, a kind of perfume that belongs to no brand, but instantly conjures happiness. There were nights of cheap wine drunk from paper cups, spilled across blankets in the park as we tried to name constellations we only half recognized. Someone would insist that one cluster of stars was a bear, someone else swore it was a swan, and eventually we'd give up, making up our own names. The spilled bottle, the crooked heart. Not all the fragments were pretty. There was the mosquito that tormented me for 3 nights straight. The sunburn that made me hiss every time my shirt brushed my shoulders. The train that broke down in the middle of nowhere when we thought we were being adventurous. But even those annoyances became stories, things to laugh about later. There's a sweetness in the imperfections too, because they make the golden moments shine brighter. One of my favorite memories is embarrassingly simple. Sitting on the steps outside my building, a melting popsicle in hand, the juice staining my fingers bright red. The street was alive with the sound of kids biking in uneven circles, parents calling from balconies, dogs barking at nothing. The popsicle wasn't even good, too sweet, too artificial, but I savored it like it was a delicacy. Because it wasn't about the taste. It was about the way the evening wrapped itself around me, familiar and comforting, reminding me that joy can be found in the smallest, stickiest things. Sometimes I wonder if we chase the wrong kind of happiness. We think we need fireworks, grand trips, epic romances. But maybe what we really need is a song stuck in our head because it played on repeat during every drive. Or the bruised peaches we ate by the lake, their juice dripping down our chins as we pretended not to care who looked. Or the way a friend leaned her head on my shoulder, saying nothing, because silence between us had grown soft and safe. These are the moments that filled my summer. They didn't announce themselves, they didn't demand attention. They simply arrived, one by one,
until I realized that together they made something whole. And when I think about how quickly the season is fading, I don't see one grand memory I'll hold on to. I see 1,000 little ones. Sticky fingers, bare feet, laughter under a starry sky, music spilling out of car speakers. I see the fragments, and they're enough. More than enough.
The last weekend of August arrived dressed in gold, the kind of gold that doesn't just shine, it clings. The sky stretched cloudless, sharp and blue, the sun pouring itself over every surface like honey. It felt like a deliberate act, as if summer wanted to leave us with one final masterpiece before stepping aside for autumn. And we, stubborn and hopeful, decided we wouldn't waste it. No planning was necessary. One message in our group chat, one last trip, and within an hour we were cramming bags into the car. Blankets, sweaters we wouldn't end up needing, baskets of fruit, cheap bottles of wine that clinked like bells in the trunk. Anna brought a speaker. Max insisted on too many snacks. Lena carried an old Polaroid camera that barely worked. I slipped in an extra sweater anyway, the kind you pack not for weather, but for comfort. The drive itself felt like a continuation of every summer we had ever known. Music too loud, hair tangled by the wind, arguments over directions that didn't matter because none of us cared where we ended up. Fields rolled past, waving with stalks of gold and green, and I leaned my head against the window, watching the world blur, thinking, this is what I'll miss when September comes, the wild freedom of roads that lead anywhere. The meadow we chose wasn't special at first glance. A patch of tall grass, a thin river winding lazily through, trees standing as sentinels on the edges. But when we spread out blankets and let the sun sink around us, it became something else. The river glittered with late light, dragonflies stitched silver arcs above the surface, and the air smelled of grass and ripe fruit. Ordinary, yes, but it was ours. We lay on our backs, pointing at clouds, inventing stories. A dragon, a crooked heart, a ship ready to sail into the sun. Laughter rose until we couldn't breathe, and when words failed, we ran down to the river, shoes abandoned in the grass. The water was shallow, icy at first touch, but soon we were splashing like children, our screams bouncing off the trees. The current tugged at my ankles, cold enough to sting, alive enough to remind me what it means to feel. Evening came softly, wrapping itself around us with a cool breath. No one wanted to leave, not yet. We lit candles in old jars, their flames trembling as the air shifted, shadows stretching across the meadow. Hannah passed around slices of watermelon, the juice dripping sticky between our fingers, staining our chins. Someone began playing music on the little speaker, and before long we were all dancing barefoot on the grass, spinning and colliding, laughing until the stars themselves seemed to laugh with us. I stepped away for a moment, catching my breath, cardigan pulled close against my shoulders. From that distance, I could see them, my friends, glowing in candlelight, faces flushed, bodies swaying to the rhythm of a song no one would remember tomorrow. It looked like a painting. One of those scenes that would live longer in memory than in reality. My chest ached in that familiar, bittersweet way. I thought, this is it. This is the exact moment when summer bows, when it gives us everything it has left before disappearing. When the music faded and the wine ran out, we collapsed in a circle, our heads tipped back to watch the sky. Stars unfolded one by one, timid at first, then bold. The meadow grew quiet, except for the river whispering its endless story. And in that hush, I felt the weight of ending settle, softly, not sharp, not painful, just inevitable, like the tide, like the turning of a page. I realized then that endings don't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes they slip into your arms gently, wrapping around you with such tenderness that you don't notice until you look back and see the chapter has closed. And somehow that gentleness makes them hurt less, or maybe it makes them matter more.
September never storms in. It slides quietly into place, almost shy, like someone who prefers to be noticed only after they've already settled in. At first glance, the days looked the same blue skies, the same golden light. But there was a shift beneath the surface. The mornings carried a crispness that clung to my skin. The evenings cooled faster, and the air smelled different, less sweet, more earthy, as though the ground itself was exhaling. I noticed it in small things. The cafe on the corner swapped out its summer chalkboard. Goodbye lemonade specials, hello pumpkin spice lattes, written in curly letters. The fruit market no longer smelled of peaches and berries, but of pears and early apples, their skins duller but their sweetness sharper. Schoolchildren appeared in clusters again, backpacks bouncing against their shoulders, their voices rising like birds returning to the sky. And shop windows, once filled with dresses bright as sunflowers, now carried coats in muted shades, boots that whispered of rain. Even the trees seemed restless, their edges brushed with fire. A hint of gold here, a stroke of crimson there, as if they had secretly been preparing all along for this quiet reveal. The city felt different too, less restless, more purposeful. Ice cream shops closed earlier, terraces emptied faster, and people leaned closer over their coffee cups, their voices soft but quick, eager to claim warmth while they could. I could have felt sadness. Summer, after all, is a season I hoard greedily. But instead, what surprised me was relief. Summer demands so much. To be outside, to seize the day, to never waste a moment. It's glorious, yes, but heavy with expectation. Autumn, though, autumn feels like permission. Permission to slow down, to wrap yourself in a sweater, to find joy in quieter hours without guilt. One evening, I wandered through the park as the sun slid lower, painting the sky in lavender and rose. The ground was already scattered with leaves, each one a small flame waiting to be stepped on. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke, sharp and nostalgic, and for a moment I was a child again, running through piles of leaves, cheeks stung pink with cold. Children still played on the swings, their laughter ringing through the cool air, but their shadows stretched longer, their parents already calling them home earlier than before. I paused on a bench, jacket pulled tight, watching the first star peek out above the tree line. And I thought, maybe every ending is simply a beginning, dressed differently. I had clung so tightly to summer, afraid it would vanish, but perhaps the beauty of seasons is in their refusal to stay. They teach us to love fiercely, then to let go. That evening, I brewed tea instead of pouring wine, and the change felt right. I left the window cracked open, letting the cool air slip inside, carrying with it the faint promise of rain. My notebook lay open on the desk, pages fluttering like restless wings. I scribbled a line that felt true the moment it left my pen. Summer is for fire. Autumn is for embers, both warm, both alive, each needed in their time. The summer had given me everything it could. Laughter, salt water on my lips, late-night confessions, sticky fingers stained with fruit, and a smile I hadn't managed to forget. Now, as the first leaf landed soft as a whisper on my balcony rail, I didn't feel loss. I felt readiness. Readiness to see what came next. Readiness to learn the particular beauty of shorter days and longer nights. And in that quiet moment, as the tea warmed my palms and the city outside prepared to fold itself into a new rhythm, I realized endings aren't always about what we leave behind. Sometimes they're about making space, not emptiness, but room. Room for a different kind of light, a different kind of warmth, a different kind of wonder.
I've always believed that every season carries its own truth, though it took me years to understand what that actually meant. As a child, I thought only summer deserved love. Those endless afternoons where the light lingered long after bedtime, the air buzzing with cicadas, the sticky sweetness of ice cream running down my hand.
Autumn, back then, felt like a thief. It stole the warmth, replaced freedom with homework, gave us shorter days and long shadows. But somewhere along the way, I realized something. Seasons aren't thieves. They are teachers. Each one has its own lesson, its own rhythm, its own way of shaping us. Summer teaches us how to live outward. It dares us to spill into the world without hesitation, to run barefoot on scorching pavement, to dive into water so cold it makes our lungs ache, to kiss someone at sunset because the moment feels too alive to waste. Summer is fire, bright, consuming, reckless. But no fire can burn endlessly. If it tried, it would destroy the very things it illuminated. And so, summer has to fade. Not because it failed, but because fire always needs to give way to embers. Autumn arrives as the counterpoint, the soft landing after the blaze. Its beauty isn't wild, it's deliberate. Leaves surrender their color with quiet dignity, painting the world in golds and crimsons, as if showing us that endings can be beautiful too. Autumn teaches us how to let go gracefully, how to savor what remains instead of mourning what is past. It's the season that whispers, slowing down isn't the same as stopping. Retreat is not failure, it's recovery. I think about the way apples taste sharper in September than any peach in July. About the way a sweater feels like an embrace, even when it comes from no one but yourself. I think about evenings when friends gather not in parks or on beaches, but around kitchen tables, talking softer, longer, with candles burning low. There's a truth in autumn's quietness. Joy doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it sits beside you like a steady flame, glowing just enough to remind you you're not in the dark. And then comes winter, the hardest teacher, the strict one. It strips everything bare and demands patience. Winter shows us what it means to endure, to rest, to sit with silence without letting it break us. It tells us that stillness has value, that life continues even when it looks asleep. Beneath the frozen soil, roots are working, gathering strength for what's next. Winter is a pause, but not an ending. Spring, of course, bursts in unapologetically, messy and loud. It doesn't ask if you're ready, it simply arrives, shouting in blossoms and rainstorms, reminding us that beginnings are often chaotic. It's clumsy, tender, insistent, and maybe that's its truth, that growth isn't graceful, but it's necessary. Looking back on this summer, I realized how often I've tried to freeze time, to hold on so tightly to a season that I missed the beauty of its passing. But maybe that's what the seasons have always been trying to teach me. Nothing lasts forever. And that's not tragedy, it's design. Summer has to end so autumn can arrive. Leaves must fall so roots can rest. Fire must fade into embers so that one day flames can rise again. I wrote a line in my notebook that night. Summer is for fire. Autumn is for embers. Winter is for roots. Spring is for bloom. And in writing it, I felt a strange peace settle over me. I sipped my tea, the steam curling up like a soft veil, and watched the trees outside shiver in a breeze that smelled faintly of wood smoke. The sun dipped faster than it had in weeks, but I didn't feel cheated. Instead, I leaned into the change, into the steady rhythm that reminded me I didn't need to hold everything forever. It was asking me to live it while it was here, and then make space for what comes next. And maybe that's the secret no one tells you. Life isn't about choosing one season over another, longing for summer while cursing winter, or rushing through spring to wait for autumn. It's about learning to love them all, even the ones you don't feel ready for, because each carries something you need. So I let the day end without regret. I closed my notebook, set down my tea, and smiled at the thought that maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to let the seasons guide me instead of fighting against their rhythm.
The last evening of summer didn't feel like a grand finale. It was quieter, softer, the kind of ending that slips into your bones before you realize it's there. I sat on my balcony as I had so many nights before, wrapped in a sweater that smelled faintly of lavender and laundry soap. The air had cooled enough to raise goosebumps on my arms, but I didn't mind. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to remember how the season changed, not in a single breath, but in countless small ones. The city below was restless in its own rhythm. Cars sliding through amber lights, a bicycle bell echoing faintly, laughter from a bar down the street. Yet above all of it, the sky carried its own story, streaks of orange bleeding into violet, the kind of colors that always arrive when a day is ready to let go. I found myself leaning forward, as if by staring hard enough, I could hold the sun a little longer. And then the memories came, rushing like waves. I thought of the lake, the sticky sweetness of peaches on our fingers, the smoke of a fire stubbornly coaxed to life. I thought of the sea, salt burning my lips, the way waves tossed us around like children who'd never learned to stop laughing. I thought of the balcony nights with wine and fairy lights, when words grew raw and true, when we admitted we were scared, but grateful anyway. And of course, I thought of him, the stranger with damp hair, the crooked smile, the umbrella far too small for two. Maybe he would remain just that, a memory stitched into a summer. But even if he never returned, his presence had carved a reminder into me that joy often hides in the most ordinary corners. This summer hadn't been flawless. There were sunburns, mosquitoes, missed trains, arguments that flared and died too quickly. There were mornings I woke anxious, nights when silence felt heavier than company. But when I held all of it together, the rough with the radiant, the season became whole. It was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be lived. And I had lived it more than I thought I would. A breeze drifted across the balcony, carrying a new scent, not the sugary perfume of flowers, but the sharper tang of wood smoke and earth. I pulled my sweater tighter and laughed softly to myself. Autumn was already waiting, stepping quietly into the room while summer gathered its things. I used to hate that feeling, the intrusion of cooler air, the way evenings arrived too soon. But now, watching the first star appear above the rooftops, I felt something different. Readiness. I whispered a thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to the season itself. To the sun that warmed my skin, to the roads that carried me away and back again, to the friends whose laughter will echo long after the nights turn cold. I whispered gratitude for the fragments that made this summer mine. Sticky fingers, wet towels, songs we sang too loudly, smiles that caught me off guard. Below, a single leaf loosened itself from a tree and drifted down, spinning lazily before landing on the pavement. I watched it fall, knowing it was the first of many. And instead of sadness, I felt peace. I wasn't just saying goodbye to summer, I was saying hello to autumn, to its golden embers, its long nights, its quieter truths. I raised my glass, not of wine this time, but of tea steaming in the cool air, and toasted the shift itself. To endings that make room for beginnings, I murmured. The city didn't answer, but the night seemed to nod, as if it understood. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't dread what was next. I leaned back in my chair, let the air wrap around me, and smiled. Because life, like the seasons, doesn't ask us to choose between joy and loss. It asks us to embrace both, to love the fire and the embers, the sun and the falling leaves. And as the final light of summer faded, I felt ready.